Mr. Füle, please go on.
Very good morning, Mr. President, honourable members. Those who criticise the European project should realise that the benefits of freedoms we enjoy are not self-evident for everybody on our continent. Peace with our neighbours, absence of threats to our sovereignty, open borders, democracy, rule of law, prosperity. These achievements, which we tend to take for granted, are long-standing aspirations of the people of Ukraine. For many, they correspond with a future based on European values, which as Europeans themselves they share. They have paid a high price in the process since last November, and I am proud to be here today so that we can together take a historic step in Ukraine's political association and economic integration with the European Union. Much has happened since we were preparing the Vilnius summit 1 year ago. Crimea, part of sovereign territory of independent Ukraine, has been illegally annexed by Russia in an act we will never recognise, and territorial integrity of Ukraine further challenged by rebels in the east, supported through the direct military involvement of Russia. Many hundreds have been killed in military action among the people who had been living as peaceful neighbours only a year ago. But aggression does not pay. On the contrary, it has further united the Ukrainian people behind the aspiration for a better future for their country. There is no time to rest. Much remains to be done. The fragile ceasefire will need to be turned into a genuine peace. The courageous move by President Poroshenko offers a real opportunity for lasting peace, but there are many challenges. Direct fighting on the ground has become sporadic and prisoners are being liberated. But unfortunately, incidents of shelling and shooting continue. Russian troops are still in Ukraine. Armed forces are using the ceasefire to redeploy and resupply, and large parts of the border remain uncontrolled by the authorities, allowing a continuous flow of militants, arms and equipment into Ukraine from Russia. What can we do? Our approach is threefold. First, we continue to give our full and active support for a sustainable political solution. Second, we are maintaining pressure on Russia through a gradual increase of individual and economic sanctions to try to make it alter its course of action and move towards a solution. And third, we continue our support for Ukraine's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity, and to help it overcome the difficulties it faces. My colleague Commissioner Oettinger is sparing no efforts to facilitate an agreement between Russia and Ukraine, ensuring a fair price for gas deliveries and security of supply to the European Union. We have also engaged with Russia to discuss the economic effects on the Russian economy of the implementation of the association agreement, including DCFTA, with a view to clarifying concerns and, where appropriate, identifying solutions. The deal reached on Friday by my colleague Commissioner Karel de Gucht is good news for de-escalation, and it has the potential to be a game changer in the ongoing crisis. And we will discuss this further in the next debate this morning. You are aware that the European Union adopted a new package of restrictive measures with regard to Russia last week on the basis of the mandate of the European Council of the 30th August. This was done in response to the increased inflow of fighters and weapons from the territory of the Russian Federation into the eastern Ukraine and the aggression by the Russian armed forces on Ukrainian soil over the past weeks, and in order to reinforce the effectiveness of existing measures. The new package includes, first, more individuals who are responsible for undermining the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and second, economic and financial sanctions with regard to access to capital markets, defence, dual-use goods and sensitive technologies. We have always stressed that our restrictive measures are reversible and scalable. Therefore, by the end of September, the Member States will carry out a comprehensive review of the implementation of the peace plan, and in the light of the review, and if the situation on the ground so warrants, the sanctions might be amended, suspended or repealed in all or in part, depending of course also on the developments in Crimea. Honourable Members, we have already expressed our strong support for the peace deal agreed in Minsk. Its implementation is a key to success. We need to learn from the recent experience, from the failed attempts in Geneva and Berlin earlier this year, to pass from words to deeds in reaching a political solution, and to respect the ceasefire agreed in June. We call on the Russian government to pass from verbal pledges to the implementation of commitments this time around, and to ensure a genuine and a comprehensive implementation of the peace plan. As I said, the implementation of the ceasefire agreement and the roadmap will be important for our further decisions on sanctions. Today it is difficult to see if and how successfully European Union relations with Russia will continue under the label of so-called strategic partnership. In the short term, much more effort is needed to reach a comprehensive conflict resolution in Ukraine, and Russia must show that it takes its commitment seriously. Russia should prove in deeds its respect for international law and the territorial integrity and sovereignty of its neighbours. As for the medium and long term, the European Union and Russia will need to further build their relations on shared interests with a view to engaging in dialogue, notably in the fields of trade and investment, energy, science, cooperation in solving international crises and in responding to global challenges. In any case, the solution to the conflict in Ukraine will be the litmus test for launching a dialogue on the development of the huge untapped potential of the European Union's future relations with Russia. We must avoid creating a lasting rift on our continent. We must also reflect on how we can jointly work on a vision of cooperation on the European continent, where all countries can take advantage of economic opportunities from Lisbon to Vladivostok. Honourable Members, our European house is being destroyed. The time has come to rebuild it, with all European partners involved, not leaving anyone outside of this process. The relationship between the EU and Russia played a central role. The relationship between the European Union and Customs Union, and in the future Euro-Asian Union, will have an important role to play. I thank you very much for your attention.
Kiitoksia herra Füle. Ja puheenvuoro on edustaja Elmar Brokilla Euroopan kansanpuolueryhmän puolesta. 4 minuuttia, olkaa hyvä.
Herr Präsident, Herr Kommissar, Kolleginnen und Kollegen! Ich glaube, dass heute eine historische Stunde.
The timing of this agreement is despicable. We have an intermittent ceasefire coming and going.
Please. Farage, EFDD-ryhmän puolesta 2 minuuttia, olkaa hyvä.
Thank you. Amongst the long list of foreign policy failures and contradictions in the last few years, including of course the bombing of Libya, the desire to arm the rebels in Syria, has been the unnecessary provocation of Vladimir Putin. This EU empire, ever seeking to expand, stated its territorial claim on the Ukraine some years ago. Just to make that worse, of course, some NATO members said they too would like the Ukraine to join NATO. We directly encouraged the uprising in the Ukraine that led to the toppling of the President Yanukovych, and that led, of course, in turn to Vladimir Putin reacting. And the moral of the story is, if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised when he reacts. Now, just to continue with that, today we are rushing through an association agreement at undue speed with the Ukraine, and as we speak, there are NATO soldiers engaged in military exercises in the Ukraine. Have we taken leave of our senses? Do we actually want to have a war with Putin? Because if we do, we're certainly going about it the right way. Perhaps we ought to recognise that the West now faces the biggest threat and crisis to our way of life that we have seen for over 70 years. The recent beheadings of the British and American hostages graphically illustrates the problem. And of course we have our own citizens from our own countries engaged in that struggle too. In the war against Islamic extremism, Vladimir Putin, whatever we may think of him as a human being, is actually on our side. I suggest we grow up. I suggest we recognise the real threat facing all of our countries, communities and societies. We stop playing war games in the Ukraine and we start to prepare a plan to help countries like Syria, like Iraq, like Kenya, like indeed Nigeria, to try and help them to deal with the real threat that faces us. Let's not go on provoking Putin, whether we like him or not.
Kiitoksia. Herra Farage, you have been presented a blue card question, actually a few blue card questions. The first one of these was by Mr. Pascu. Do you accept this blue card? Mr. Pascu, 30 seconds, please. Kiitoksia. Seuraavaksi herra Telitska, 3 minuuttia, olkaa hyvä.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I need to say that I find it highly regrettable that Baroness Ashton is not among us. I would wonder what, at the end of her mandate, she's got better to do than to be present at such a serious, highly sensitive and highly important debate as we are having here today. This is also how I would interpret the rather, with all due respect to you, Stefana, the highly general remarks that you have made, because otherwise I would find them in the course of this debate and facing what has happened just a few days ago somewhat inappropriate. Let me maybe underline, and I do regret that the leader of the advocates of Mr. Putin group here in the Parliament is not present, but let me remind of the fact that I come from a country which in 1938 was facing a serious threat, and that due to the agreement that has been reached in a city not far from the Czech Republic, basically we were left alone. Now you might say that this is a very inappropriate comparison, but what we are facing today is, first of all, ratifying an important agreement. In fact, an agreement that I had the privilege to be a part of when we were negotiating with the European communities at that time in 1990-1991. I'm still fully aware how important it has been economically, how important it was politically, and how important it was psychologically. So today, the Ukrainians are basically, I would tend to say, in a similar situation. No, they are not. They are in a worse situation. We were in 1990, 1991 surfing on a wave basically which was not to be stopped. Today Ukraine is still in very unsafe waters. In this respect, I don't need to remind ourselves that we are facing a situation which is an aggression, a breach of international law. thousands of lives killed, Russian forces in Ukraine, other means that are so appropriate for certain services in Russia. And I have a lot of regret for the fact that just a few days ago it has been agreed in trilateral talks, that means in presence of the Russians, that the implementation of the trade agreement will be postponed. Now, if I look into international press, what does it say? Russia has 2,400 amendments to the draft agreement. Do we really think that in 1 year from now, Russia will not have 2,400 amendments to be made? That Russia will finally be satisfied with the fact that we are concluding this agreement? No. I think we have given up on certain standards, on certain values. I think that we have failed. I must say that on the sanctions, on the foreign policy side, we have done well. But in this case, just one last sentence, we have made an enormous mistake in the presence of the Russian negotiators. That has to be rectified. I hope that we will ratify fully the agreement today. Thank you.
Thank you. I have received a number of blue card requests, but I have to be very stingy because we have to be able to vote at 12 and we have a video link to Kiev. So we go on with the speakers list. Mr. Iglesias, 1 minute, please.